Hello, welcome to another virtual program from Maine Historical Society. I'm Kathleen Newman. It is April 29th, 2025, and this is the impact of log drives on Maine rivers with John Field. Now, we'll take a moment, the way we always do before we start the program, just to remember that Maine Historical Society recognizes that what is currently referred to as Maine is Wabanaki homelands, a place the Wabanaki have stewarded for 13,000 years. And wherever we are in Maine, we're on Wabanaki homelands. And we recognize the inherent sovereignty of the Abenaki, Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, Passamaquoddy, and Penobscot nations within these lands and waters. Understanding Wabanaki history is vital to understanding Maine, and we are committed to helping provide education about that history through partnerships with Wabanaki people. Joining us today is Dr. John Field, who is a fluvial geomorphologist. Did I say that correctly, John?
Yes.
AKA a river geologist, who has worked on rivers throughout New England for 25 years. Time and again, the flooding and erosion problems that Dr. Field addresses as a consultant are linked to the log drives of a bygone era. Previously a university professor, he won two Excellence in Teaching awards and is skilled in explaining difficult concepts in an engaging manner that draws great interest during public presentations. And he joins us today to talk about how, even though the log drives of the Maine lumber industry, those log drives are long gone, the historic impact they've had on the environment remains. Thank you, John, so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everybody. The introduction sort of covers the slide I have here. I have been working on streams for more than 40 years and more than 25 years in New England. So some might say I know a thing or two about rivers. But let me start with current events. And many of you are well aware of flooding of the last couple of years has been quite severe. December 2023 was sort of the largest statewide event since 1987, causing major inundation of Augusta and other towns along the Kennebec River, as can be seen in these slides. But in addition to the inundation, there was also severe erosion problems a few months before that in the summer of 2023, particularly in the Jay, Dixfield, and Wilton regions, as shown in these slides. And even beyond the erosion and inundation hazards, also making the news was channels shifting positions completely, as here on the south branch of the Sandy River in Phillips, Maine. The slide on the left looks like the stream is flooding. That's actually the number 6 road that is flooding and carved out a completely new channel. The stream completely shifted into the road's position, and the stream channel was largely abandoned by that flooding. Another current event that many of you might be aware of is that the Atlantic salmon is listed as federally listed as an endangered species in many watersheds in the state of Maine, highlighted on the map there. And in some cases, these two current events sort of conflict with each other, as is the case in Phillips, Maine, that I showed just previously. As a result of the channel shifting onto the number 6 road, the town constructed berms along the river to block the flow paths onto the number 6 road, basically putting the stream back into its original channel. Not really aware that the South Branch is also some of the best Atlantic salmon habitat in the state and is actually a very key part of the salmon recovery effort that many environmental groups are involved in. So this resulted in the Maine Department of Environmental Protection issuing a notice of violation of environmental laws, and now the town is requested to develop a restoration plan to restore the habitat. Now, what might not be well understood by many is the link of these current events with past events on rivers and streams. And given the title of my talk, of course, I'm now talking about the log drives. For those new to the state, you might be unaware that in uh, past decades and even for centuries on some rivers and streams in Maine, there was an annual log drive. Basically, starting in April when the snow melted, the logs would be floated downriver to lumber mills. And in fact, the first log drive started in the 1600s, where large white pines were floated down rivers. Certainly on the Connecticut River, I know, but likely on the Penobscot as well. Even some indication on small streams in Falmouth. These white pines were floated down the streams to be used as masts uh, for ships for the English Navy. But moving into the 1800s, latter part of the 1800s, these log drives were huge, uh, creating log jams that were very difficult to break up in some cases, uh, shown here on the Connecticut River as well as the Kennebec River. These log drives continued through most of the 20th century, becoming much smaller by the 19 teens, but they did continue until the last log drive in the United States was on the Kennebec River in 1976. That was a national story on the front page of the New York Times. Let me just take a second to note this was not a job for me. I probably wouldn't have survived more than an hour hopping from log to log in frigid cold waters in April. And many did die doing this very dangerous work. If you're interested more on the details of the log drives, I would recommend these two books, Log Drives on the Connecticut River, obviously not from Maine, but they do talk about, or it is talked about in the book, how many Mainers did come as sort of expert log drivers to help assist and even lead the log drives on the Connecticut River. And then the book on the right also has very good information. This book written in 1967. Some of the language recalling some of the stories from the early part of the 20th century might be a bit shocking to 21st century sensibilities, but again, very good information included. Now let me turn our attention to the impact these log drives had on the rivers and streams. There's very little documentary evidence of what was actually done on the rivers and streams. We have a lot of details on how the log drives were run, things like that. But what they actually did to the rivers and streams to assist the log drives, documentary evidence is somewhat limited. This is the best I have found in 1863 law in New Hampshire that gave the log driving company basically free rein to do anything they wanted on the river. So our evidence today of how the log drives impacted the rivers is basically what we can see on the ground and on maps and aerial photographs. So I'll go through a few of those with you. First of all, you can see some of the old log driving dams. Here's a small remnant of one on Sunday River. Here's what one looked like at the time on the Sunday River. They were much taller than the remnants. They were basically designed to create a pond upstream wood was laid on top of the ice of the pond in the wintertime. And then when the spring melt came, they would basically tear the dam apart, perhaps later just dynamiting the dams and letting that wall of water rush downstream to help assist the movement of the logs downstream. Another thing you can see quite well on the Kennebec River in many places, if you want to see it, I would drive on the road through Madison, Maine. You can see them quite well on the aerial photograph. All of these, all of these individual dots on the aerial photograph here on the right are one of these log driving boom piers, and these piers in Hallowell you can see on the ground in this photograph. And what those look like when they were in operation is they would string logs between the boom piers to basically cordon off a portion of the river to keep the logs moving in a faster portion of the flow, or to help sort of separate logs from different companies, things like that. So on this photo, you can see all the logs on the left and sort of open water on the right. Another thing that you read in the 1863 statute from New Hampshire is that the companies had the right to basically move boulders and obstructions out of the stream channel. You can see this on the ground in many places. Here in North Conway, New Hampshire, on the Saco River, the collection of boulders along the bank is not natural. These would have been spread sort of haphazardly, sort of naturally, before they were pushed to the side by the log driving efforts. Also on the Soddenonk stream in Baxter State Park, you can see also streams or boulders along the side of the streams. Boulders get in the way of logs moving downstream, so it made sense from a log driving perspective to push them to the side. And in later years, sometimes the boulders were just dynamited into smaller pieces. One thing that confused me for several years is on log driving streams, I would see boulders in the middle of the stream channel, and it just didn't make sense. Why did they leave a boulder in the middle? And it came to me just a couple of years ago that actually the river is shifted. The river has eroded into the bank, and so this boulder was likely on the side of the bank at the time of the log drives, but the river has shifted and put the boulder now into the center of the channel. From a habitat perspective, this is a good thing, and actually why we don't have any photos of what it looked like from before the log drives. As part of restoration work I'm involved with the Holton Band of Maliseet Indians in Aroostook County, we've been placing boulders back into the river. And again, at high water, this helps carve out pools, sort of trap spawning gravels, and sort of creates good habitat that's been lost by the removal of those boulders during the log drives. Now let me turn my attention to sort of the greatest impact of the log drives on rivers and streams in Maine and throughout New England. These two photographs show what many of us would consider the sort of idyllic New England streams, sort of tree-covered, babbling waters. This is what we've seen all of our lives. For those of you that grew up in New England, this is all you have known. Now, I'm sorry to shatter your childhood memories, but these streams are artificially straightened. These were straightened by the log drives to help move logs. Not only do boulders and trees get in the way of the log drives, those were pushed to the side or removed completely, but also the meanders, sort of logs floating around meander bends helps them get trapped up and create jams. So in most places, these channels were straightened to essentially create log flumes to ease the movement of the logs. The result of the straightening is faster moving waters able to erode the banks, and these streams tend to widen out, become shallow. There's very few pools, and uh, as well in the summertime, the water can warm up more easily. So this is poor for cold water fisheries, trout, and salmon. But there's no documentary evidence of the straightening, very little that I've seen where you actually see a report, we straighten the stream channel. So we need to turn our attention to maps where there's plenty of evidence of this straightening. First, I'll start on the White River in Vermont because some of the hallmarks of straightening you want to look for are well illustrated here. I realize many of you might not know how to read a topographic map, so let me give you a crash course to help you understand how we know these rivers have been straightened. Anyway, all these sort of parallel brown lines are contour lines. If you stay along the same line, you're staying at the same elevation. If you start crossing contour lines, you're changing elevation. Each contour line represents about a 20-foot change in elevation. So where all these contour lines are very close together, we have a very steep hill slope going up to the top of the mountain. On the valley bottom here, you'll see there's no contour lines or just one, indicating there's very little elevation change. We basically have a flat floodplain. This contour line might be indicating a step up to a slightly higher terrace where all the homes are built out of the floodplain. The evidence for the straightening comes in the sense that we can see a natural meander up here, but then moving downstream, there's space for two or three meanders of the same size, but none are there. There's a floodplain across which those meanders could form, but there is no meander. The missing meanders, indication of straightening. Another indication of the straightening is that this channel is suspiciously against the steep valley side slope. The river could pick anywhere along the floodplain to form. The fact that it's up against the valley slide slope is a strong indication it was artificially straightened by humans up against the valley side slope. Third indication is sometimes you can see the old meanders that were basically abandoned when they straightened the channel. And here we can see a tributary sort of filling in the old meanders that used to flow along the river. So any one of those three is an indication of straightening. Now let's return to Maine, where we can see plenty of evidence of straightening. Here on the east branch of the Penobscot River, we have the river up against the valley side slope. We have missing meanders. You can see some natural meanders just downstream. And we have old sort of channels on other parts of the floodplain here. I don't care whether you're in Western Maine on the Sunday River, you can see the straightening the river up against the steep valley side slopes. You can go to Eastern Maine down east on the Machias River. We can see it's not as much elevation change, but you can see the river up against the sort of higher ground here. A whole wetland area the river could be flowing across, but it is suspiciously up against the high ground on the valley side. Northern Maine in the county, you can see even in a narrow valley, the river could be forming meanders across the narrow floodplain, but instead it's straight up against the valley side. Or we can go to southern Maine, very little elevation change, but this river is suspiciously straight and up against some higher ground. So west to east, north to south, every river and stream in Maine was essentially straightened. You're hard pressed to find one that has not been straightened in the state. Those folks that settled in Maine and started moving west. The folks from New England that started to push west with the nation's frontier, they took their habits with them. You can basically pick any state in the nation and you can find the same thing. I decided to pick Idaho. Here you can see same thing. Straight river channel up against the steep valley side. The river could be flowing anywhere across here. So the habits of New Englanders were transferred across the country as the frontier expanded. But these straightened rivers are inherently unstable. They are artificial. Nature likes sort of the meandering plan form, if you will. And so what we see throughout New England is that these meanders are reforming along these straightened channels. Here on the Battenkill in Arlington, Vermont, a log jam formed across the straightened channel at this location on the aerial photo. The river backed up behind the log jam, escaped onto the floodplain, and carved a new meander. This happened essentially overnight during a single flood. The river shifted 300 feet in one evening. The folks living in this house went to bed with the river 300 feet away. They wake up in the morning and the river is lapping up against their front lawn, already having carved through the hayfields. So these straightened channels represent a potential hazard. And we can see meanders reforming throughout New England. Again, I return to the Penobscot River in Maine, that straightened configuration, but you can actually see a meander has reformed along that length, the abandoned channel still present along the valley side. In some places, these meanders have completely reformed, that the only evidence you have that it was once straightened is the fact that these meanders are all hugging the valley side here in Fairhaven, Vermont, on the New York border, a very wide floodplain across which the river could have been flowing, but the fact that it's still hugging the valley side, even with the meanders, an indication of the past straightening. A little less clear, but returning things back to Maine, Bemis Stream flowing into Mooselook-Maguntic Lake in the Rangeley Lakes region. You can see the stream faintly here hugging the valley side, but the meanders sort of having reformed. So what does this tell us? How can we use that information, our knowledge of this legacy of log drives and how rivers are responding to them? How can we use that information to inform us as we try to address these current events of flooding and erosion problems, as well as sort of the degraded aquatic habitat? Returning here to Nassadnahunk Stream, we can see evidence of straightening and the meander reformation. Notice that the stream is flowing against the steep valley side, but meanders have reformed, but the entire floodplain is where the river could naturally flow. The fact that it's hugging the valley side, strong indication that it was straightened in the past. Plenty of evidence, documentary evidence that log drives did occur on this river. No documentary evidence that it was straightened, but from what I've shown you on the maps, we can definitively say that in fact it was straightened. Other places on the Nassadnahunk Stream, the meanders have formed much more broadly, in fact, have crossed the entire valley and are impacting the tote road, which basically connects the south and north gates of Baxter State Park. And there's two places where these meanders have kind of impacted the road shown in the photos below. And so the park hired myself and an engineering colleague to help them understand how do we stabilize the roads, or how do we better manage the river and the erosion problems. So when I basically alerted them to the fact that it's not only at those two locations where you might have problems, but a log jam forming at other places along the Strait and Hook stream could result in new meanders forming and impacting other parts of the road that are perhaps 100 or more feet from the current stream channel, that they could suddenly wake up one morning with a new problem after a flood. The park is sort of taking seriously the idea of sort of relocating the road a little bit further away from the stream and the potential areas where new meanders could form. This will prevent them from having continuing problems over the coming years, but also allows the river to naturally restore itself, because as these meanders reform, they also create excellent habitat for trout at Baxter State Park. And so the clientele of the park, obviously the visitors, most of them, a lot of them enjoy fishing. So they don't want to sort of stabilize the road and sort of constrain the river's ability to uh, restore itself and its habitat. Now let me return to Phillips, Maine, where earlier in the talk I mentioned the current event of the dredging, building of berms to sort of keep the stream out of the number 6 road, where it had basically shifted to as a result of the flooding. If we look at the south branch of the Sandy River, we should not be surprised, given the history of log drives on the Sandy River in Phillips, Maine itself. A major tributary, we should not be surprised, was a log driving stream. And we can see evidence of that in that the stream channel is up against one valley side, where it would naturally be flowing anywhere across this wide floodplain or alluvial fan area. So basically, the arrows are showing that the river wants to shift towards number 6 road, not because of number 6 road, but because straightened channels are unstable and want to reform their original plan form, original uh, sort of meanders, or in this case, lots of side channels. And these side channels make for great salmon habitat. So by keeping the stream channel pinned against this mountain side, we're basically limiting the potential habitat for Atlantic salmon, hence the conflict. Moving number 6 road, moving these homes might be a difficult discussion that needs to occur in the town of Phillips. Such discussions are just starting now. The actual talking of moving things is maybe not been voiced out loud, but ultimately it's going to need to be. There is no engineering solution here. That this is just the value of the land and the road is going to be less than the actual cost of an engineering solution, and that doesn't address the habitat issues at the same time. So a very complex issue here that is ultimately related to the log drives from decades ago. There are little things that can be done throughout New England that can help. Some, and these involve sort of mimicking what we've learned on the natural recovery of these streams, that log jams help sort of reform meanders and trap sediment. So we can add wood to stream channels, and that helps trap sediment. This is sediment that's not moving downstream to sort of impact infrastructure. Again, I have to stress that these are types of activities that would occur where there is no infrastructure. Building log jams to help form meanders If we can form meanders in an area where there is no infrastructure, then the stream is less likely to reform meanders where it will impact infrastructure. And as we reform meanders, we are creating good habitat. So these are the types of things we can consider, but we can't do enough of this to really solve problems. This is really long-term watershed management to address these problems. We need to manage our watersheds in such a way that we can allow these processes to occur. Land conservation becomes critical to provide space for these rivers to reform meanders, recreate habitat without impacting infrastructure. But again, engineering solutions to some of these problems are not truly sustainable because hopefully after hearing this talk, you understand that the continuing legacy of log drives on Maine's rivers sort of prevent or will continue to create problems if we continue to try to hem these rivers into the way they are now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. And folks, just a reminder, excuse me, if you have questions, you can type them into the chat or using the Q&A button. John, you mentioned, can you tell us a little bit more about the work, did you say with the Mi'kmaq or the Maliseet community on trying to restore some of the rivers?
Right, the Maliseet tribe, the Penobscot Nation is starting to do some work as well. A lot of other organizations, not tribal organizations as well throughout the state, are sort of beginning to understand this legacy of log drives, its impact on habitat, and how do we uh, try to restore that. But um, I've been working with the Maliseets for a number of years doing these types of restoration projects.
So someone in the audience is asking, how on earth did people actually do the straightening of a river?
Very good question. Early on, I have one story from the Merrimack River in New Hampshire, talking about the limited documentary evidence, but there was a story in a book that talked about Boston John and his team of oxen that would come up the Merrimack River and they would dig a furrow across the inside of a meander. And then when the flood came, the water would concentrate into the furrow and basically carve out a new channel, a straight path cutting off the meander. In subsequent times, steam shovels might have been involved, and even in later times, turn of the century, 18th to 1900s, uh, 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 dynamite was actually used in some cases.
Someone
But
else
good
is asking, oh, sorry. Finish up.
anyway. But yeah, that's sort of an unknown exactly how they did it.
Someone else is asking about dams on rivers in Maine. Do we know how many Maine rivers have dams? Are they being removed? Can you speak to that at all?
I don't have an exact number of dams. I was showing you some small sort of log driving dams, but actual old mill dams, there's many that are impacting rivers and streams in sort of different ways and also similar ways. And yes, that is also a big movement in the environmental community uh, is and the fisheries community is removing dams. The Edwards Dam in Augusta on the Kennebec River is perhaps the largest that's been removed in the state, but others as well. Sebasticook River has been the focus of many dam removals, and then other smaller ones throughout the state.
Someone else is asking about stories of logs from the logging industry that are sunken beneath many of Maine's rivers. Can you speak at all to the effects that those sunken logs have on the rivers and the river habitats?
Short answer is no. I've heard the same stories. Uh, I've seen sort of singular logs along rivers that um, actually, for me, an old log driving dam, I can create one out of two parallel logs sticking out of the bank. Because two parallel logs sort of sticking out of a bank in nature doesn't make much sense. So there is that, but actual sort of stranded logs from log drive, maybe on some of the sort of bigger and deeper rivers, they do exist. But I can't really comment much on their
Sure.
impact or how many there are.
Mm-hmm. Now you were t told me you have a class coming up if people are looking to learn more about stream and river restoration, watershed management. You're going to be teaching a course virtually this fall. Is that correct?
Yes, the week before Thanksgiving for 3 days. This is usually attended by watershed professionals, engineers, fisheries folks, Forest Service people. Now that it's virtual, we have people from across the nation sort of touching on these issues. I really focus more on that channel straightening topic because it's across the nation and it's a big issue. Um, but anyone's welcome, but it's a much deeper dive into the topic.
Sure. And I just shared that link in the chat, rivermanagement.org/, river training center, for anybody that's interested. Couple other questions. You mentioned the importance of topographical maps to discern the river straightening process. Do you do you have some archival resources that have helped you in some of your work that you'd recommend?
Well, actually, what I was showing you today was sort of the more recent topographic maps, circa 1980s. But
Hmm.
actually, the United States Geological Survey has a website with historical topographic maps. Some of those maps going back to the 1890s are some of the original topographic maps of parts of Maine. Other parts is 1940s is the earliest. There are some aerial photographs in some parts of the state that go back to the 1930s. So those are excellent resources. University of New Hampshire also has the New England topographic maps on file, but USGS has those as well as the entire nation on file. So with those, you can actually compare sort of the 1890s. You can actually see the straightened channel, and then the recent topographic map, you can see the meanders have reformed. So in that way, you can definitely document. You just don't need the sort of the hallmarks I pointed out. You can actually compare them and see the meanders have reformed.
Well, thank you so much, John or Dr. Field, for being here with us today. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we close the program this afternoon?
Oh, thank you for listening. And if you'd like to contact me, my email is right on this slide here. So feel free to write. Thank you very much.